CBS News Today. The corridors of power in Seoul rarely intersect so directly with the private lives of pop idols that they alter the legal and social architecture of the country. Yet, in the spring and summer of 2025, a cascade of events, sparked by a long-simmering problem at the intersection of celebrity worship and public safety, forced a rare public alignment between a national government and one of the world's most visible artists. What began as a series of escalating harassment incidents by obsessive fans or Sasaengs evolved into an unprecedented government response, targeted enforcement, legislative pressure, and ultimately, a formal acknowledgement that a national interest was at stake when the personal safety of Jungkook, the golden magne of BTS, was threatened. This is the story of how private obsession became a public emergency, how institutional actors moved behind closed doors, and how an investigation that began with leaked CCTV footage and anonymous tips concluded with both government officials and Jungkook's agency acknowledging, officially and publicly, a romantic relationship that many fans had long speculated about. The arc of the affair is not merely gossip, it is a case study in how modern celebrity, state power, and civic norms collide in a media-saturated democracy. The first cracks appeared in late winter 2025, when a series of unusual security incidents at the singer's private residence and during transit were reported to local police. At first, they were catalogued as the isolated misbehavior of ardent fans, photographs taken without consent, strangers attempting to force interactions outside gated areas, and persistent attempts to trace private schedules through illicit means. But the pattern hardened. What had once been a parade of intrusive gestures became systematic targeting, repeated surveillance from multiple devices, hired drivers following private vehicles, and on more than one occasion, coordinated attempts to enter private property under fabricated pretenses. An internal law enforcement memo reviewed by sources close to this investigation, who spoke on condition of anonymity, details how officers identified a network of Sasaengs that operated with alarming sophistication. This was not emotional impulse, one source said. It had coordination, logistics, and money behind it. The memo noted cross-border communications, encrypted messaging channels, and an apparent circulation of private photographs obtained by illegal means. Investigators likened the pattern to organized harassment, rather than the random acts of a few misguided fans. As the incidents multiplied, so did the pressure on the cultural institutions that manage Korea's global soft power. HYBE, Jungkook's label, is no stranger to crisis management. The company maintains a tightly controlled public posture and a sophisticated legal team. Yet HYBE's private channels were reportedly stretched thin. The risk calculus shifted. A former executive with knowledge of the firm's internal deliberations told this reporter, "You are no longer dealing with reputation damage alone. You are confronted by threats to an individual's safety and the potential for international incident." The turning point came in April 2025, when leaked surveillance footage of a late-night pursuit, recorded from a neighbor's doorbell camera and disseminated across social platforms, showed unidentified individuals trailing a vehicle believed to be transporting Jungkook's personal driver. The clip, circulating in 100 variations, sparked outrage among fans and a broader public debate about the moral limits of fandom. The footage's virality forced an official response. The Seoul Metropolitan Police publicly announced a probe into targeted harassment toward a private individual and affirmed cooperation with other agencies. For the first time, a law enforcement agency framed the problem not as a celebrity PR issue, but as a matter of criminal harassment. Behind the scenes, the stakes escalated sharply. Sources within the Blue House, again speaking anonymously due to the sensitivity of internal communications, describe urgent consultations between the Presidential Secretariat's Public Safety Team, the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, and the Ministry of Justice. The core question, according to these insiders, was whether the pattern of harassment had crossed a threshold where state intervention was warranted beyond routine policing. The country faced a dilemma: act overtly and risk appearing to privilege celebrity over ordinary citizens, or act quietly and risk catastrophic harm that would be politically indefensible. The government chose a third path: a targeted, legally framed intervention designed to protect an individual while articulating a broader public interest. In May 2025, the Ministry of Justice convened a task force to examine the adequacy of existing statutes for prosecuting obsessive fan behavior. Officials considered new enforcement guidelines focused on unlawful surveillance, trespass, doxing, and the commercial sale of illegally obtained personal data. Simultaneously, the Ministry of Interior authorized a temporary allocation of additional investigative resources to the Seoul Police unit handling the case, an unusual move that signaled the issue's seriousness. At the same time, confidential exchanges between government aides and HYB executives reportedly intensified. The request was not simply for protection. One source close to the negotiations explained, they wanted structural change, a way for the state to deter the broader ecosystem that enables this kind of stalking. According to documents and testimonies reviewed by this reporter, those negotiations included discussions about legislative amendments to increase penalties for invasive fan conduct, new data protection enforcement, and enhance cooperation with international platforms to curb the spread of illicit images. HYBE, in internal briefings, framed the matter as both urgent and existential. The company's legal counsel pushed for clear public statements of support that could fortify criminal cases and deter would-be perpetrators. Executives worried that inaction would embolden a subset of the fandom, while eroding the company's ability to secure safe working conditions for its artists. They were asking for what lawyers call privileged state action, a public backing that changes the political cost-benefit calculation for offenders, the former executive said. The Blue House, wary of accusations of favoritism, demanded that any public moves be framed within public safety and legal reform, not as special treatment for a celebrity. The public sphere reacted in predictable yet combustible ways. Online communities fractured. ARMY, BTS's global fandom, rallied behind petitions and coordinated campaigns urging the state to protect its members and the group. At the same time, segments of the public questioned policy favoritism. If a pop star could trigger direct government intervention, what about less visible citizens who faced similar harassment? Commentators on mainstream outlets debated whether the move risked creating a precedent for state protection centered on celebrity deep pockets and international influence. Amid the maelstrom, a second narrative gained steam: rumors about Jungkook's private life. For years, speculation about idols' romantic relationships has been a volatile undercurrent in K-pop fandoms. What was different in 2025, sources say, was the apparent link between obsessive fan behavior and the singer's private associations. In confidential interviews, law enforcement sources told this reporter that investigators had found evidence indicating persistent efforts by Sasaeng not only to monitor Jungkook's movements, but to coerce information about his personal companions. There were clear attempts to identify and expose close associates, one investigator said. Whether those associates were friends, staff, or romantic partners was a question of interest to the probe. Leaks, some deliberately orchestrated, some chaotic, began to surface. Anonymous pages and encrypted channels circulated photographs and purported messages related to Jungkook's personal life. Many of these materials were quickly debunked. Others were tantalizingly ambiguous. The relentless speculation put enormous strain on the singer's inner circle. Sources inside HYBE report an exhausted staff working around the clock to separate falsehood from fact, to protect third parties caught in the crossfire, and to mitigate legal exposure. What eventually broke the logjam was not rumor but a coordinated legal and political strategy. Prosecutors, armed with stronger evidence from digital forensics and surveillance, obtained warrants and made several carefully targeted arrests of individuals implicated in illicit surveillance and the sale of private data. Those arrests were accompanied by quietly issued statements from the ministries involved, describing the actions as part of a broader effort to protect privacy rights in the digital age. Public messaging emphasized the universal principle at stake, that illegal invasions of privacy warrant prosecution, whether the victim is a celebrity or an ordinary citizen. Then, in a carefully choreographed move that stunned both the fan community and the public at large, representatives of the government and HYB convened for a joint press briefing in early June. The room was tense with expectation. Government spokespeople read a prepared statement. The state would deploy enhanced enforcement resources to combat organized harassment and illegal distribution of personal data, and the Ministry of Justice would propose amendments to clarify penalties for invasive conduct. HYB's representative followed, outlining the company's commitment to cooperate with law enforcement and to pursue civil litigation against offenders. But the most consequential moment came when the Blue House, speaking through a senior official, took the extraordinary step of acknowledging that Jungkook's safety concerns were entwined with his private life in a way that had become a matter of public concern. In language that had the effect of an official imprimatur, the statement confirmed that government protection measures had been requested by HYB in light of credible threats associated with targeted harassment of the artist's private associations. The statement avoided explicit naming of any partner, but the phrasing and the timing created space for a more direct acknowledgement. 2 days later, HYB released a shorter, more personal statement, co-signed by the artist's legal representative and the company. Jungkook requested privacy as he navigated a personal relationship that had become the subject of malicious public scrutiny. The statement noted that HYBE and the artist welcome and appreciate the state's support in ensuring safety and legal recourse. Crucially, it also said, plainly and without euphemism, the personal relationship referenced has our client's full consent to disclose. We confirm that Jungkook is in a private, consenting relationship. For observers accustomed to coy denials and the carefully policed, no dating scripts common in idol culture, the straightforward language was seismic. The government's earlier statements, positioned as a public safety intervention, now read in light of an admitted private relationship. The confirmation reframed the entire intervention from being merely protective to being tacit recognition that the artist's right to a private life extends to the choice of a partner, and that attempts to criminalize or punish the existence of that relationship through doxing or harassment would not be tolerated. The fallout was immediate and varied. Within ARMY, reactions ranged from fervent support to stunned silence, as some fans struggled with the long-standing, complicated relationship to the idols they love. Online harassment of the partner, already a risk, was met with immediate legal threats from HYB's lawyers and coordinated takedown requests. Prosecutors warned platforms that facilitating the distribution of illicit material would invite criminal liability. Social commentators raised broader questions. Had the state overreached in protecting a celebrity, or was this a necessary assertion that privacy laws must be enforced even in the face of a monetized, global fan economy? Legal scholars weighed in, noting that the episode had accelerated conversations about digital privacy, victim protection, and the ethical obligations of social platforms. This is not simply a celebrity story, said one academic specializing in privacy law. It's an inflection point for how the law views coordinated harassment that leverages technology. The fact that the government intervened publicly may make it politically easier to pass reforms that benefit all citizens. Opposition voices, predictably, framed the events as emblematic of unequal treatment under the law. Critics demanded transparency about the legal criteria used to allocate additional investigatory resources. The administration responded by emphasizing the evidence, namely the organized nature of the harassment network, the transnational chain of data sales, and convincing threats to personal safety that compelled a targeted response. For Jungkook personally, the period that followed was calculated and constrained. Public appearances were minimized. The artist and his agency emphasized music and content that historicized privacy and resilience. In private, those close to him described a weary celebrity adjusting to the paradox of increased protection coupled with the loss of ordinary anonymity. Friends and staff spoke of the psychological toll of sustained invasion and the relief that law enforcement and legal remedies were finally engaged more assertively. The broader cultural consequences remain to be written. The event spurred calls for better education among fans about consent and boundaries, to push platforms to improve content moderation, and to update legal frameworks that have struggled to keep pace with technologically enabled harassment. It also underscored the delicate balance democratic societies must strike when a government, compelled by credible threat, chooses to act in defense of an individual whose life is, by profession, public. This episode was not a simple story of celebrity privilege. Rather, it illustrated how the modern machinery of fandom, digital commerce, and cross-border data flows can create harms that demand systemic responses. The government's involvement, pragmatic and politically fraught, helped catalyze a national conversation about the limits of fandom and the obligations of the state to protect privacy rights. When at last the public record closed around the matter, a few durable facts remained. Coordinated harassment networks had been identified and several actors prosecuted. HYB pledged to pursue civil remedies and to work with platforms, and Jungkook's relationship, previously the subject of rumor and speculation had been acknowledged by his agency, with the state's support framed in terms of public safety and legal enforcement rather than celebrity privilege. For many, the moment marked a small step toward normalizing the idea that public figures are also entitled to private lives without fear of organized exploitation. For others, it raised questions about who receives protection in a society where visibility often determines vulnerability. And for the millions who follow the lives of pop stars around the world, it was a stark reminder. The machinery of celebrity is not merely an industry of screens and stage lights. It is a fragile ecosystem in which intimacy, privacy, technology, and the law collide. In the months after the official confirmation, policymakers moved to formalize some of the emergency measures into more durable safeguards. Proposed legislation clarified penalties for illegal surveillance and the commercial distribution of private images, while pilot programs tested rapid response units that coordinate between law enforcement and platform operators. Whether those reforms will close the gap between legal theory and enforcement in the messy, decentralized world of online fandom remains uncertain. What is certain, however, is that the case carved a rare pathway. When a private life becomes a matter of public safety, the state can, and in this instance did, step in, and in doing so it forced a nation to reckon with the costs of its own global cultural reach. The story is, in the end, more than the tabloid arc of a romance exposed or a celebrity shielded. It is a portrait of modernity's collision with desire and technology, an unfolding reckoning about how much a society is willing to police for the sake of a single person's right to live without fear. The confirmation of Jungkook's relationship, explicit and supported by official channels, closed one chapter of the drama. It stripped the veil from speculation and reoriented the discourse toward rights, enforcement, and the responsibilities of fans, platforms, and the state. Whether that reorientation endures will depend less on any single press briefing than on the slow work of institutions catching up to the speed of obsession.